These days, there's a lot of talk about gender equality and the place of women in our society. It's largely accepted that women can do anything that men can, but questions arise on whether they're receiving the recognition for doing so, and whether women are actually able to take advantage of the opportunities available to them. In my opinion, maybe to solve our problem, we should just take things back to the way they were in the good old days. Further back than that, keep going. There, that's about right. This past summer, I interned at Plymouth Plantation, which is a living history museum in my hometown of Plymouth, Massachusetts. We feature a recreated Wampanoag home site and a 1627 English village, which is why I'm wearing those wonderful ill-fitting clothes up there. My time at the plantation reintroduced me to colonial society and altered my conceptions of their gender roles. Popular conceptions focus on the patriarchal nature of their societies, and so a quick comparison between women's lives then and now results in the belief that women today are of course far better off now than they were back then. But early New England gender structures weren't as simple as that. Settlers had to build new societies from scratch, so everyone was needed to ensure their survival, women and men alike. Women largely tended to the home so that men could build, farm, and so on, but they also did whatever needed doing, and they received acknowledgement for it. So maybe that comparison between women now and then isn't as simple as we make it out to be. I'm not saying we should mimic colonial society or reestablish the patriarchy, but I do think we could learn something about our current situation by rethinking the roles of our founding mothers. One of my tasks as an intern at the plantation was to research one of the colony's women. Her name was Elizabeth Warren, and no, she was not the same person as a Massachusetts senator. What I learned over the course of the project was that Elizabeth Warren was pretty badass. Warren married Richard Warren in 1610 in England, and the two had 5 daughters, Mary, Anna, Sarah, Elizabeth, and Abigail. In 1620, Richard left England on the Mayflower, leaving his wife and daughters behind. They followed 3 years later in 1623 on either the Anne or the James. Once the couple was reunited, they had 2 more children, sons this time. Nathaniel was born in 1624, and Joseph was born in 1626. In 1628, things changed for Elizabeth when Richard died. Most widowed women of the era remarried fairly quickly to ensure the protection of themselves and their children, but Elizabeth chose a different route. She remained single for the 45 years she outlived Richard. Her sons were only 4 and 2 at the time of Richard's death, so there was no way they were going to be able to take care of the family. This put Elizabeth in charge, both of her children and of the estate. The Warrens were a wealthy family in the community, but during her time as matriarch, Elizabeth was able to substantially add to their list of assets. She began showing up in town records on tax lists in place of Richard, and then she showed up in a couple of civil court cases as well. She popped up in land records, mostly giving plots of lands to her daughters upon their marriages. But she typically wasn't too eager to part with her lands, as is evident with the ongoing court saga with her son Nathaniel. Nathaniel took his mother to court over a plot of land he believed owed to him that she refused to give up. After several unsuccessful court hearings, the case was unresolved, so some of the most important men in the colony, like William Bradford and Miles Standish, got involved. Ultimately, Elizabeth was forced to fork over part of the land. The fight with Nathaniel wasn't Elizabeth's only familial property dispute, as a few of her sons-in-law brought her to court over pieces of land through the years as well. Plymouth Colony was a company, meaning they had to send products back to England to pay off their investors. The men in the town who held shares in the company were called purchasers, and in 1637, Elizabeth petitioned to become one in place of Richard, and her request was granted. She was the only woman to be named a purchaser for the entire time Plymouth Colony was its own colony before being absorbed by Massachusetts Bay in 1692, which goes to show the type of influence she held in the community. This position gave her an advantage in obtaining new lands as the town expanded, so adding this to the land she already possessed, she became very wealthy. Elizabeth lived to be about 93 years old, which is old for now, so it's super old for back then. So even just by living, she did something that set her apart from the other women of her time. My summer research on Warren inspired me to look further into the lives of colonial women for a proposed research project last semester. I looked at female criminals in 17th century New England and the types of crimes they committed, potentially to find out why those transgressions were occurring. During my search, I came across some women who were as equally interesting as Warren. As preliminary research, I looked at court records from Salem and Plymouth County before 1700. And while much of what I read amounted to what I can best describe as 50 Shades of Puritan, I did learn a lot about the daily lives of New England women based on where they were and where they weren't in the court records. There were several instances of women committed speech-related crimes. They lied, they cursed, and they defamed and slandered other men and women. Obviously, such vocal transgressions go against the idea of the submissive, silent colonial woman who doesn't have much role in her community. In the mid-1600s, Essex County fell victim to an epidemic of women wearing silk. The fabric was deemed inappropriate, but such visible violations represented a conscious decision on the part of women to go against community expectations. Women could also be hauled into court over unseemly carriages, indiscretions in how they behaved in public. It was small actions such as these that allowed women to step outside the boundaries of behavior they were meant to be limited to. I'm not suggesting that these women were revolutionaries or that all women were ending up in court, but rather I'm trying to show that women in the 17th century could and did make decisions for themselves. Some women committed acts of physical violence, the degree of which varied. On the one end, there are several instances of women striking other women and men, and on the other, there's Alice Bishop of Plymouth, who was convicted of murdering her young daughter and was sentenced to hang. In 1641, the wife of Hugh Brown of Essex County viciously beat her husband, threatening to kill him. She broke his head, threw stones at him, and verbally harassed him. The court record also noted that the neighbors were annoyed by her actions. One interesting case came in that of Lady Deborah Moody. Now, right off the bat, the lady in front of her name separates her from the other women of the court records. Moody was accused of not believing in infant baptism, a central belief of her community's religious values. Her decisions impacted not only herself, but also her children. She wasn't present when the case was heard in court. By choosing not to appear, Moody used her position in society to assert a level of personal agency. Her title already came with certain advantages, but she controlled the direction in which those advantages played out. So to bring that to the present, what can women like Moody, Warren, and those others mentioned in the court records tell us about today? Not all colonial women were the submissive rule followers we think of them as in our collective memories. They rebelled against cultural norms, held positions of power, and played an integral role in establishing new societies. They may not have had recognition of being considered equals, but they were assigned a certain level of importance. Sorry, that was going to say. How's everyone doing tonight? You guys all doing well? Yeah? So there are plenty of women today, or plenty of Americans today, who believe that there's no need for feminism or the women's lib movement is over, because women are already considered equal to men, duh. But despite those social conceptions and attitudes, there's still plenty of instances where women today in the US are not considered equal to men. Perhaps the most familiar of these inequities is that women don't make as much money as men do. Overall, women's salaries amount to about 82.2% of men's. Within the same fields, in the same positions, they make 7% less than men. On a state-by-state basis, women make between 64 and 85 cents on the men's dollar. Now, some of you may already have heard these numbers before, but I bring them up again now because it's important that familiarity doesn't turn into apathy. Even so, these monetary matters are not the only obstacles faced by women in attaining equality. Part of the reason for the wage gap is that women often go into lower paying fields than men do. Female representation in STEM fields is embarrassingly lacking. Women make up only 24% of workers in science, technology, engineering, and math. Even if women earn undergraduate degrees in these areas, they often get careers in other disciplines. The gender gap is seen through all levels of education in these fields. Part of the reason of the lack of female representation in STEM is stemming from social constructions. Women are often pushed into more nurturing careers like education and social work, despite the idea that both men and women can study whatever they like. In middle and high school, girls are taught by their social environments that math and science are for boys, and if you're good at or like those subjects, then there's something wrong with you. Just as the colonial women were relegated to certain aspects of their culture, today women are directed into certain aspects of society as well. And regardless of where women are working or how much they're making, workplace harassment is still very real. Of all the charges of sexual harassment filed with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission from 2010 to 2013, between 82.2% and 83.9% were filed by women. These figures, of course, don't represent the unreported cases, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to conjecture that the actual figures look similar. Women today are subjected to all levels of sexual violence, just as they have been for all of history. Overall, these numbers tell us that women today are given all the responsibilities and expectations of being considered equals without being granted any of the rewards. The colonial women I discussed earlier didn't experience the same level of choice that today's women do. However, generally speaking, women are still expected to take care of domestic matters, just as were their 17th century counterparts. And they're also expected to hold careers on top of that. Women are expected to fulfill both kinds of roles, but the type of work they're doing, what happens when they're there, and how much they're making places them below men. So depending on your angle, the position of women in today's society may be better or worse compared to that of women in the colonial era. Being able to make these comparisons is part of why studying history is so important. History gives us the context for understanding not only who we've been, but who we are. At any rate, I think those waistcoats just might make a comeback. Thank you.